if you want to have a job where when you walk into the room, all conversation stops, a severe chill infiltrates your bones, and everybody turns to you with a scowl upon your face, you too should consider being an internal auditor. It's not any fun. I'm not exaggerating, unfortunately. I was an internal auditor one time. We're going through a major transition, so they asked me to be an internal auditor, and I didn't just audit the finances. I audited to see if all the different business practices at 5 different colleges were being followed. And so I would sit down and go in and do a review, and usually people would panic when I would walk in the door, and all conversation would stop and all eyes would turn towards me, and it's kind of, he's here. It's not a very pleasant feeling. But if you're comfortable with that kind of situation, I recommend one of 2 things. Become an internal auditor, or maybe actually go and see a psychiatrist in the process as well, because by the time it's all done, you'll have different psychoses, because nobody likes an internal auditor. But that said, it's got to be done, and it's got to be done really on a regular basis, because if you don't do it, the numbers are going to show up. We already talked about that aspect of it. So I want to look at some of the preventative detective correction. You want to sit down and go through if you're auditing, but before one shows up, you always got to go back and double check the aspect of what type of internal controls that should be in place, and are you using them? You shouldn't need an internal auditor. To some extent, an internal auditor is just like those quality control experts that Deming says get rid of. An internal auditor should not be necessary. Everybody should be following all the different controls in a department on their own without having somebody walk into a room and everybody get all frosty. You would be surprised, though, as to how sloppy things become on a regular basis, where you just check out the petty cash fund. It's supposed to be $300. How come it's $283? Well, I think I loaned money to somebody for lunch and they never paid me back. Well, what are you doing dipping into the petty cash for somebody's lunch? Well, I forgot to turn in the receipt. Then stop using petty cash. You have all kinds of things from petty cash to multiple different places you're gathering revenue in. Should be only one place. You have all these different aspects of it. People forget about things and they let things ride without going and checking on them on a regular basis. This is not the work of a special person coming in, but looking at the internal controls. And this should be just talked about and people should follow through in it. But you know what? People are still human in the aspect. So detective control, regular reconciliation of bank statements. One time I was sitting there and I was going to go visit one of the campuses and I knew they had trouble. So I went to do something rather fun and entertaining, for me at least. I told somebody, I said, okay, you come over here. I'm going to have a conversation with you. And you just go, yep. Oh, yeah, you should do that. Okay, so I went on the other side of a cubicle of what I call the head grape, the person that is a gossip monger at the district office for the 5 colleges that were in our 5-college district. We actually had 9 different sites, but 5 different colleges. I just sat there and says, you know what? I'm going to go over to this campus over here, and I'm going to show up there first thing in the morning, and I'm going to go through the books and check to see how they're doing over there. And if I find anything wrong, I'm going to do some formal disciplinary action. And we'll see about the whole aspect of if I have to go through just a suspension or a termination for some of the improper things they have going there. And I just went on to let other person go, and their eyes are getting big and everything else. I just went on and on and on. Well, I know exactly what happened. Soon as I walked away, the phone calls started going from the head grape over to the other campus and everything else. I didn't show up the next day. I showed up 3 days later. When I showed up 3 days later, I just kind of walked in and I said, how are the books doing? I just looked at a couple numbers and I walked out. Everybody was terrified to death I was coming to visit them, and I just really didn't want to put up with the hassle. They knew what was wrong and they knew how to fix it. I just sat down and used the informal communication network to get the internal controls that they already knew in place. Sometimes you sit down and you get the magnifying glass. If you correct one problem over here, people watch that and then you start correcting all the other problems, the 17 other ones that you don't see in the process. Regular reconciliation of bank statements, auditing controls. Use really the risk-based approach. Instead of having multiple different areas to gather cash in, start consolidating them so you have a higher control in the aspect of where that's at. And that way people sit down and pay more attention and you have trustworthy people and you can hold people accountable. Look on the high-risk areas in financial reporting. When you create a budget, make certain that you build some flexibility in the process. One time I created a budget, and of all things, I had the chancellor of the district, our 5-college district. She used to be a bookkeeper once upon a time. So she came and she decided that, our president left and she was going to become the chancellor for the whole district and my college president. I was really joyed over that one. So she came over and she's going through the books and she says, David, she pointed to an account for adjunct faculty salaries. This one over here, it looks to me like you got about $120,000 extra in there. I says, and if I do? She says, well, you need to sit down and be more open about it. I said, listen, do you remember that $57,000 you wanted for this repair over here and how I magically reproduced it? Yeah. I says, I sat down there and I hid the money and I used it and that's how you got it. You stay out of my business and you go in the president's office and leave me alone and I'll make certain that you'll have the money you need it when you need it. And yes, that's where I stashed the money and that's where my secret fund is. So stop messing in my books. Fortunately, she didn't fire me. Life was good. Auditing procedures, sometimes it just depends where you're at. Make certain on the controls that you know exactly where the money is and where it's supposed to be. And if you have a stash someplace else, make sure you know about it in case your boss shows up and lets you know where it's at. Techniques for auditing controls: ask questions, understand the process from beginning to end. Know the financial allocation process, how the budget is developed. Look for the different aspects, how it's out there. Make certain that you have regular inventories of merchandise on a regular basis. One time I was a general manager of a giant housing cooperative, and the auditor comes in, and I had 500 condos. Well, I bought 500 new smoke alarms, and they're all downstairs in the stockroom. So the auditor comes across there, and he says, I want to go count the the smoke alarms. You want to do what? I said, they cost $10 a piece. He says, yep, they do. He says, but you bought 500 of them. Okay. He says, I want to count them. I said, oh my gosh. And I rolled my eyes. And then I went down, opened up the storeroom, and let him go count the smoke alarms. They were all there. He was happy. Sometimes you just go in and you count something as simple as smoke alarms just to make certain that there's no incongruities in the process, because you'll find that if they find this over here, if there's a problem here, there'll be more problems. You'll do more checking by the time you're all done. Look at the inventory accounts. Review the documents and the records. Verify the existence and accuracy of records. One time, I had an employee, and the employee was off, and I had to go find something, and I went into the bottom tray, and lo and behold, I found 5 personal checks in there from people that were paying their rent into that giant housing cooperative. I put them instantly into the cash drawer. She came back in the next day and says, where are those checks at? I said, they're in that tray. And I said, they better not ever be there again. If it happens again, you and I are going to have words. Ended up, I left that place, and 2 years later, she was caught check kiting. What she would do is people would sit down there and give her money, and instead of her depositing it in, she would sit down there and take the check and put it in her bottom tray and float the money. It's called check kiting, and she had 19 different checks, and by the time it was all done, they couldn't approve it, but in essence, she got away with $23,000 in money where she would sit down there and have personal loans by floating the checks back and forth in her check drawer and keeping the money for a 3-day float. That being said, sometimes I caught her before she got out of control, and I stopped her when I was there, but when I left, she went right back at it. Sometimes you find something and you fix it there and make no bones as to what you're doing and why you're doing it. Sometimes you have to go back and recheck your process for consistency. Ensure that the controls that you have in place are working as intended, and sometimes you have to just go back and double check things. I don't know about you, if you ever do any kind of reporting reconciliation, sometimes $1.17 you can't find, and you go back and forth in it, and you come back the next day and it's sitting right there and it's been there the whole time. You just couldn't get it done because it was 9:30 at night and you're trying to close out your books. Life happens. Use software tools to analyze data. Make certain you have anything possible to sit down there to look for unusual transactions that seem out of place. A lot of times, computer-assisted audit techniques can find things, and now with AI, if the AI is being honest, and by the way, AI at this point really doesn't do a very good job on most things, the detail simply isn't there a lot of times, but the reality is Use the aspects to look for different kind of transactions. Have walkthroughs. Just walk through the area, do surveys, flowcharts. A lot of times, auditing or looking at the controls to make certain that they're in good shape is just looking and checking things out. And it's not hard to do sometimes. So engage with the business being audited. Be proactive and agile in your auditing process. Have meetings to discuss the findings and compare the current state of the organization against what are the expectations. That really is what the auditing really is about. This is what you planned on having, and this is the actual state. Oh my goodness, what is the difference in the process? Is anything amiss? You're looking at that. And it really includes not just money, it also is about policy enforcement. That really is part of the role of internal auditing on top of that as well. It's all about controls, and sometimes you can sit down and just reassert the controls by just checking things out on a general basis. It's incredible how you can find little things can lead to bigger things if you're looking closely enough. And that really is what the internal auditor really is all about. Take care.